Listeners and supporters of Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM, where there's always something good to talk about. Our in depth with Ty Barnett session today is titled Sisterly Chat with Appway, Association of Black Women in Higher Education. Our special guest is Dr. Cherisse R. Jones-Branch, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Communication, also known as CLAC, at Arkansas State University. Now, allow me to paint a picture for you of this amazing woman. She is just so great, so bright, and has a wealth of knowledge in so many areas. Growing up, she actually wanted to be a soul trained dancer and later an historian. And also, because she loved dance so much, that's her reason behind the soul trained dancer, I guess. So we'll ask her about that later, right? But she was more enamored with the history of things, right? And research. So she's also a trailblazer. She loves books and encyclopedias more than dancing, but she's an academic historian whose history is being told and written about what's being excluded, what's more important to her. So even though she loves history, she wants to know about what's excluded so she can help others. She also served in the U.S. Army Reserves and the Persian Gulf War. Wow, how dynamite is that? She is also a former debutante. See, guys, I told you, let's keep on painting this picture. You never know. She owns what she sees and asks questions about what she does not see. In 2017-18, she was the University Educator of the Year. In 2020-23, she was recognized amongst the top 100 women of impact in Arkansas, appointed by Governor Asha Hutchinson to the 2022 Commission on the Status of Women in Arkansas, author of Crossing the Lines, Women's Interracial Activism in South Carolina during and after World War II. And we will have Dr. Jones speak more on that later in our conversation. Now, listen here, guys. She is also a native Charlestonian. So anybody out there from Charleston, she's your gal. She graduated from the College of Charleston with her BA in history in 1994, as well as her MA in history in 1997, and obtained her Ph.D. in American history from the Ohio State University in 2003. Go Buckeyes! She is also the author of Better Living by Her Own Bootstraps, Rural Black Women's Activism in Arkansas, 1913-1965, a project full of curiosity and enthrallment with diverse experiences of rural Black women spreading beyond their work as agricultural laborers in the Jim Crow South. Now, let me share this with you guys. There are a couple of readers that just were enamored by all of her work. And I'm going to share a couple of those testimonials with you guys as quick as possible. One reader stated that the book was very informative. And the reader is actually a native of Arkansas as well. And that reader had never heard of any of the many stories that was documented in this book. But they also did not realize or understand the significant impact of African-American women and Caucasian women in rural Arkansas. At her back door, she had no clue. And then there was definitely a force to be reckoned with. So many familiar names and places that this reader could now familiarize herself with. So many educational facilities and programs, past and present. Another reader stated that they enjoyed Dr. Branch's wonderful book, and also being a professor, they enjoyed the times undergrad taking her as a graduate student and bringing in the scholar work and the aspects of Arkansas women and the battle for rural African-American communities. This is so awesome. And to speed it up a little bit for you guys, her teaching specialties are United States, African-American women, civil rights, rural history, and some of the courses that she's taught over her time, and I'm sure she's teaching even more, is African-American history to and since 1877, U.S. Civil Rights Movement, United States Women History, and the U.S. Southern Women's History. Now, quickly again, I'm going to share with you 2 testimonials or 3 or 4 testimonials from some of her students because this speaks volume. So any of you interested in attending Arkansas State University in the future, this will let you know that this is a professor and dean for you, that you are going to be in the right place. So one of her civil rights students stated that even if you're not a history major and you really, really, really need to take one of Dr. Branch's courses, you will learn more in just one of her courses than you will ever in any other class. You can easily tell that she's dedicated to her job, which means she expects you to be dedicated to her courses. She likes to teach as much as she likes to learn from others. Another student said that I love this class and professor, a ton of material, but she makes it interesting. The assigned novels are good if you don't wait till the last minute. If you fail, it's your fault, not hers. Her pop quizzes, but has many of them, but you know they're coming. Good notes will ensure an A on a midterm and final. If you're disciplined, you will make an A. Oh, and participate. Another said Dr. Jones-Branch is one of the best professors that they have ever taken. She is really into what she teaches and willing to discuss anything with students. She is tough, but in a good way. If you take her class, you will learn a lot. And then another and final student that left a comment was, and they put it in all caps, she hold nothing back. If you do not do well in her class, it's because you did not put forth the effort. Her door is always open. So guys, I would like to take this time to introduce you to the amazing, the remarkable Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch. Welcome to Thank You for joining Sister the Chats.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. I know that was probably kind of long, but I wanted to get your greatness out there in the beginning before you give us a little bit more about yourself.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a pause because it seems like you have quite a few people that are interested in chiming into the conversation. You did share that you shared the Zoom link with a few people. So I see we have one in the waiting room, which is Jamaica Walker, and I think a few more. So we're going to take a pause real quick so that we can let them in a meeting.
Okay, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we're back here now. So like I stated, we have just done our introduction of this amazing, amazing woman, Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch. And I'm just going to start with my introduction is literally only a touch of your greatness. Please tell the listeners more about the young life of Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch from Charleston, South Carolina.
Well, I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, and I come from a long line of people who have always been in the low country of South Carolina. I come from people who are called the Gullah Geechee. I grew up eating shrimp and grits long before it was ever popular. I ate it all the time. I grew up eating a lot of seafood, and I was just always very immersed in Black history and Black culture. Grew up in a predominantly middle-class African American community on the west side of Charleston, and that's the life I knew until I left and went to Ohio State University for graduate school. Of course, I did have a stint in there when I was in the U.S. Army Reserves and I went to the Persian Gulf. I also like to tell people that even though I have an undergraduate and a master's degree from the College of Charleston, I actually spent my freshman year at an HBCU. I went to South Carolina State University. And it was in that second year at South Carolina State that my unit was mobilized and we were sent overseas. And when I made it back home 6 months later, I just decided, I want to stay close to home. And so I transferred to the College of Charleston. But I like to let people know that even though I went to college in my hometown, I lived on campus the entire time.
Wow.
I had the whole campus experience with the added bonus of being able to get home in about 10 or 15 minutes if I needed to.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Good stuff. Now, you've also shared previously in other interviews and things of that sort about your stint with being with your grandmother and visiting your grandmother down in, was it Charleston or South Carolina as well?
Well, it was down in Adams Run, South Carolina. My mother is from Adams Run, South Carolina. My late father was from Georgetown. South Carolina. So my family is from up and down Highway 17 in the South Carolina Low Country, and this is what I knew. This is what we did all the time, and so I have many memories of spending time out in the country with my grandmother on my mother's side, and going to what we can call the city of Georgetown, South Carolina, only because it was a bit larger and more urban than Adams Run, where my mother grew up.
So what intrigued you about joining the service? What, because you were educated and things of that sort. What piqued your interest in that?
I wanted to pay for my college education, and actually, originally, my plan was to go into the Army full time, and my parents pretty much vetoed that. And I told them, and I was 17 at the time. Back then, and I don't know if this is still the case now, but back then, if you were 17 and you wanted to join the Army, a parent had to sign for you. And I told my parents point blank that, if you didn't sign for me to join the Army Reserve when I turned 18, I was going to join the Army, and there would be nothing they could do about it.
Woo, feisty, huh?
Um, when I look back all those years later and I think about who I am now at this point in my life, I think in so many ways I've always been this woman.
I love that. A
Mhm.
woman that knows what she wants
Yeah.
and who takes control of her life because
Mhm.
that will count. This is your life and what you want to do.
I
Oh,
didn't have the language for it back then, but I think I've always done that.
absolutely. I love that. All right, Dr. Jones. So before we move forward, let's just go ahead and tap into other parts of your greatness because we just learned a little bit about your background in Charleston and as well as your stint with your grandmother and all the great things you did in the country, your love for seafood, and just so many amazing things that you have starting of your life because you have to know where you started from in order to know where you're going, correct?
Yes, that is absolutely right.
Good stuff. So then let's look at your D9 experience
Mhm.
because as I see here, I see you have your beautiful necklace on. So I will not state the name. I am going to let you share your experience, what sorority that you belong to, or other organizations you belong to, and what piqued your interest on joining those organizations as well.
Well, I'm a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, and as I said, Miss Walker is my soror. She was my student and my mentee first, and then she later became my soror. But I have been a member of Sigma Gamma Rho since the fall of 1991, so over 30 years, and it was just a good fit for me. I have always been very fastidious about doing what's best for me and knowing what's best for me, and that was just the organization that I chose to join. And I often tell people that I am in fact an AKA legacy. My mother is an AKA, but Sigma Gamma Rho is just a better fit for me, and it's a decision that I've never regretted. As I said, I'm also a member of the Order of Eastern Star, Prince Hall affiliated. I became a member 11 years ago. I'm also a member of the Blytheville Social Art Club, which is affiliated with the Arkansas Association of Colored Women. And that organization is affiliated with the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, which has been around since about 1896.
Wow, and that's awesome. And actually, I do have that as one of our conversation topics, the Arkansas Associated for Colored Women, so you can share more about that organization if those that are interested and joining, if it's still active and things of that sort. So we would love to have a conversation about that
Sure,
going forward.
absolutely.
Okay. Now let's talk about because you've done a whole lot and you continue to do a lot with your travel and just being a dean and everything else. How do you handle work-life balance? I know that's relevant to you, but how
Mhm.
do you ensure that you have that self-care and that work-life balance with everything that you do within your career?
Well, the thing that I always keep in mind is nobody's going to take care of me as well as me. And I'm just hyper vigilant about knowing when to pause, when to take a break. I typically get up between 5:30 in the morning. First thing I do is thank God for another day, make myself a cup of coffee, pop in a YouTube video, and exercise. And I used to tell myself that, ugh, I have to exercise. Now I tell myself, thank you, Lord, that I get to exercise. And so I had to change my whole thinking about that and realize that it's a blessing to be able to work out. There are people who can't do that. It's a blessing to be able to open my eyes in the morning and still be in my right mind. And as they used to say in the church I grew up in South Carolina, that had the blood running warm through your veins. And so as I've gotten older, I find that I don't take those things for granted anymore. But also for me, exercising early in the morning, it's how I start my day. It's when I think about what I'm going to wear for the day. It's when I remember to make notes about something that I need to handle later on. It's just a good way for me to, as they say, get my mind right. So when I go to the office and things start coming at me right and left, I can deal with all of that. And I'm just a firm believer that even during the course of the workday, take a break. When I take my lunch because I prefer to cook my own food and take it with me, I think it's healthier that way. But when I take a break in my office, I close my door, I listen to jazz music, I play a game on my phone, I claim that time. And I had to really fight against this narrative that we have to be grinding all the time because I'm not a robot. I can't do that. I can work really hard and I can do a lot of things, but I deserve a break and I take a break. And I encourage other people to do the same. Go take a walk around campus or something, breathe, and then come back and tackle whatever problem it is that's a problem for you at that point.
Love that. And through all of everything that you just shared, one word comes to mind for me is discipline.
Mhm.
I can tell that you're disciplined. Now, would you say being disciplined comes from your stint in the army, or do you feel like you already had that? Because we know that your mother was an educator as well,
Mhm.
science, I believe.
Mhm.
So, would you say that discipline started prior to you going into the military, or while you were in the military, which kind of shaped and molded who you are today with that discipline?
I would say all of that.
Mhm.
My parents instilled the importance of working hard and having things together. I always tell people that my siblings and I'm the oldest of four children. We knew we were going to college. We knew that we were expected to perform well academically. We knew we weren't supposed to get in trouble. So a lot of those seeds had already been planted from the time I was very young. I think just being in the military just exacerbated all of it. And then, of course, just getting older and you get better at filtering out what matters and what doesn't.
I love that. Now, what and who inspired you to pursue a career in education?
Well, initially, I knew I always wanted to be a historian. What I tell people often is that because my mom is a retired teacher and my late father was an electrical engineer, I grew up in a house surrounded by books. So I read a lot. As a matter of fact, my siblings and I could all read before we went to elementary school. That's how much we read. And I grew up in a house with Britannica Encyclopedia. I had the Ebony Encyclopedia of Black History. We had subscriptions to National Geographic, Jet Magazine, Ebony Magazine. And so I saw a lot of history. And in the process of reading that, I also had questions about what I didn't see in those histories and what I didn't see and hear in social studies and history classes when I was in high school, and really even to some extent when I was in college. But it was just something that always interested me. And I tell people that there wasn't a lot of support for me to become a historian because most people have and still don't have any idea what all that entails. But I'm pretty determined. And so I knew that that's what I was going to do.
Okay, good stuff. Now, what would you say shaped your perspective on? We're going to pivot a little bit. What would you say shaped your perspective on the relevance of representation for Black women in Arkansas?
I think the thing that mattered most for me is we didn't really have very many stories about Black women. There are a few, the Daisy Bates story, which
Mhm.
most people don't even know all the complexities of that story. But I became interested in writing rural Black women's history. That's not where I started. I wrote about Black women, but I never wrote about them in a rural context. And I said, well, there are all these stories of these other women. And even still today, Arkansas is an overwhelmingly rural state.
Hmm.
Why aren't we hearing about these women? And I started writing about rural Black women. At first, I started writing about Black women who were home demonstration agents who were employed by the Arkansas Agricultural Extension Service.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to know more about them because I asked someone who had written about these women, and they told me that they did the same thing that white women did. And I just didn't accept that because how could that be possible in the Jim Crow South?
Oh,
The job description might have looked similar, but the deeper I dug, the more I found that, oh, your experiences couldn't be more different, even down to the pay. I discovered that these rural Black women who are working in these communities, they might be making, I don't know, $600 a year in
mm,
1930, 1940, but their white counterparts were making 1,000.
right.
That,
Well,
yeah. Hmm.
my gracious. So now you mentioned Daisy Bates.
Hmm.
Educate the listeners on, you can do it in brief or as lengthy as you would like, on who Daisy Bates is.
Okay, so Daisy Bates was an activist in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she was the advisor to the Little Rock Nine in 1957, really before and even after that point. And so that's the context in which most people know her. But when I write about her in my book, I talk about her as a rural activist. I talk about her activism after the Little Rock Central High School crisis and how she goes to rural Arkansas and she does things like help rural Black communities get garbage collection and sewage collection and things like that. So I take her out of the context that everyone thinks she knows and say in my writing that this is what this woman did even after this. She was still an activist. She was still involved in these other things. Oh, and by the way, she owned a newspaper that was the source for all things African American life in not only in central Arkansas, but in Black communities around the state. And so for me, it was just really important to complicate that narrative about who people thought she was.
Wow. So I want to roll back a little bit because as I did some research on you and just preparing for this moment to be graced by your presence, tell me, what is it about Arkansas? Because you're doing so much and you've
Mhm.
done so much about rural Arkansas and just Arkansas in general. What touched your heart or made you want to move there and just make such an impact?
Well, I moved, so I have to say that I did not want to move here. I've been living here for 21 years and I love my life here, but I will be completely transparent. I came here because this was one of the jobs I was offered when I was completing my doctorate and about to get out of graduate school. And I came here and I interviewed. I had no interest in taking the job, had never heard of Jonesboro, Arkansas before. And I came and it was really the university and the people in the history department that led me to think, okay, I could try this for a couple of years. And the plan really was 2 years.
Hmm.
But in the process of all of that, I also met and married my husband, who is from Dumas, Arkansas, which is a really, really small community in South Arkansas. And then I just came to realize that there's a lot of stuff here that people aren't seeing. And perhaps I saw it more clearly because I'm an outsider. I sometimes you can see things that other people don't see because they see it every day. And I just realized really quickly that there's some really rich history here. And actually, I said, I'm here and I have good access to the resources. So why shouldn't I write about this stuff?
Absolutely. Good stuff. Now, since your time there, because you've done so much, but working specifically with women and girls in Arkansas, which projects and initiatives have brought you much joy and why?
Well, I have to say I'm on the Women's Foundation of Arkansas. I'm on their board and on their executive committee. I really enjoy that work because it's something that allows us to empower women and girls, regardless of race, throughout Arkansas. It provides them workforce information. It provides grants for women entrepreneurs, and so I find that work incredibly rewarding. Also, when I was appointed by Asa Hutchinson to the Arkansas Women's Commission rather, that was very rewarding as well because the last time they had that commission was 1973.
Okay. Now, do
So it
you
had been,
believe? Oh, go
mhm.
ahead. Yes.
No, so it had been a while, and so I was very proud to represent Jonesboro on that commission. But it also it's history making. We were making history in being in that position on that committee almost 50 years after the last commission.
Wow. Now, do you believe that with the historical struggles, achievements by women, whether it be in Arkansas or just globally, has it impacted your career path and field?
Oh, absolutely. I tell people all the time that my parents were educated people,
Mm-hmm.
but well, some people in my family had gone to college. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a first generation college student. I wasn't. However, my mom grew up poor. My father grew up poor. My grandmothers were people who cleaned up behind others. But my grandmothers and my grandmother on my mother's side in particular were visionaries. She knew my mother, who was the only girl of six boys. She knew my mother was going to college. I don't think she knew how she was going to make that happen, but she had enough foresight to know that her daughter was going to college. And my mother did go to college. She did graduate, and they passed this down to us. And I say all that to say that I understand, respect, and am thankful for the foundation that they laid for me. My life would not be possible without their labors all those years ago. And so I don't forget about that. I don't forget about the lineage that I come from. And I often think about where I am in my life and in my career. And I wonder, have I made my grandmothers proud?
Absolutely, you have.
Mm.
I believe you have. Just reading about you and even just hearing what your students and some of the readers that have read your books have stated about you, you have made an impact and you continue to make an impact. So, absolutely, you give yourself a high five and a pat on the back because you're definitely making them proud. So, thank you for that. Now, let's pivot to something a little bit different on when we talk about I just want to know, are we still living, or do you feel that we're still living in a world where we just take so much for granted, right? And as we look at topics in your book about food canning and preservation and childcare and all those things, a lot of things that you touch on so much, but
Mhm.
there are a lot of stereotypes when it comes to people of color, or want to say Black people, African American people, about eating watermelon and fried chicken and all these stereotypes and things of that sort. Just expound upon what your thought process is from the food canning and preservation, and us as of a people of color having to prepare ourselves for just life in general.
Well, I would say this, and I've always told my students this: if someone goes so far and beyond to make you into a stereotype, to try to convince you and whomever that you're inferior, you must be really powerful.
Mm,
Why invest all that energy in that? If that's just who you were organically, would you really have to work that hard to convince somebody?
yeah, I love that.
If they have to if they have to work that hard to convince you, you must be really, really special. And to your point about, chicken and watermelon and things like that, I tell people all the time, do the research on the significance of chicken
Hmm.
in Black communities. Black women sold chicken plates because they were entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
Black women sold chicken plates to build churches, to send children, sometimes not even their own, to
Okay.
school, right? Watermelon is an easy to grow and was a profitable crop for formerly enslaved Black people in the turn of the 20th century.
Hmm.
So, again, if people are trying to force you to buy into these stereotypes, push beyond those. Find out what the real backstory is. Why are they so invested in this? Right. And so I've read enough to know that this is the work that Black people and Black women in particular did to support their families. This is the labor they performed so their families could eat, so that they could have a home, so that they could participate in church functions, so they could go to school. And so there's nothing wrong with eating fried chicken. There's nothing wrong with eating watermelon. And you need to question why somebody would make you feel bad about that, and why you allow yourself to feel bad about a stereotype that someone has mapped onto you, a stereotype that is not of your making.
Absolutely. So, listeners, as you heard here, stereotypes, if just because they say it doesn't mean that it's true.
No.
And as Dr. Branch Jones Branch stated, it is definitely a survival tactic. It is a way to make a way out of
Hmm.
what others may say as a no way. It's those that are entrepreneurs today with all of the, let's talk about soul food restaurants and just restaurants in general in the community, people coming together for love with food in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be chicken or watermelon with those stereotypes. It's about unity and coming together to help others and to
Right.
help yourselves and the family. So I love that. So thank you for that. But reflecting on your own experiences, what challenges, if any at all, have you faced as a woman in your career field, and how have you overcome them?
Well, of course, I'm a woman of a certain age who was, as I would tell people this, when I was growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I attended segregated schools until the 80s,
Wow.
right? And I was raised by parents who lived through Jim Crow. And as I tell people, again, as a historian, just because you have a civil rights movement and pass laws does not mean that customs on the ground change as quickly as the laws do.
Hmm.
And so I grew up with plenty of the remnants of Jim Crow. I distinctly remember things like my parents when we would travel from Charleston to see my grandmother in Georgetown, and this was in the 70s. We didn't stop at gas stations. I didn't understand that at the time. But we didn't stop at gas stations. What I understand now that I did not then is that my parents could not be guaranteed service, even though it was the law.
Wow. Wow. And guys, when you see her picture and you see her, let me tell you something. She speaks of her age. Her experience has not worn on her at all. She's
Oh,
gorgeous.
thank
Okay.
you.
So let me tell you that her husband's lucky. Now, specifically at Arkansas State University, in what ways do you see yourself as a trailblazer for women and girls, and not just of color, because you definitely have touched so many people and continue to touch so many people, not just in the African American community, but globally. But more importantly, what motivates you to continue to break these barriers?
I I guess I've never thought about what motivates me. I I suppose if anything motivates me, it's the recognition that I won't always be here. And I want younger women, and I don't care what background they come from,
Mhm.
I want younger women to know what's possible. And I've told students this in the past. I think I've done really well for myself. I want you to do better.
Love that. I
I
love
want you to do better. And let's be real, sexism is still a thing, racism is still a thing, but it's not a thing like it was during my grandmother's day. So we are still fighting those battles, but I would never have imagined ever being a dean of anything. I didn't know what that was. I mean, I guess I knew, but I didn't know what it was. So for me, it's it's about making sure people see what's possible. It is also about not being a gatekeeper. If I can provide you with opportunity and access, believe me, I'm happy to do that because along the way, someone had to do that for me. And I understand very well the importance of paying it forward. And that's what I tell people when somebody's like, thank you for doing X, Y, and Z for me. That's fine. I appreciate that. But if you really want to thank me, when you encounter someone in a similar position, help them.
I love
Very
that.
simple. Help them.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's that saying when you stated that you didn't really know what a dean was. You knew of it, but look,
Mhm.
as what some of the songwriters may say, look at you now,
Ah,
right?
yes.
Look at you now in the position. Say what? Leave it a beaver. Who would have thunk it?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I love it. I love it. So now, what would you say is or was a pivotal moment in your influence from women's history that has shaped your professional journey?
A pivotal moment.
In women's history.
You know, I would say I have often taught about the March on Washington in 1963. And when I teach about that, I don't teach it in the traditional way. I tell my students to think about all these women who are working in the background,
Hmm.
all of these women who, for example, produce Lord knows how many thousands of sandwiches so people could eat.
Hmm.
All of these women who, quite frankly, wanted to march and were not allowed to. The women who helped plan, who have never, the March on Washington, who have never fully gotten their due. It's the women in the background, and especially Black women who have always labored in the trenches, who have not ever really been fully recognized for all they do. And I think about that scene in that movie, Hidden Figures, when they're applauding the astronauts and the women workers, and off to the side is the Black women. But if you didn't know they were there, you wouldn't know they were there.
Absolutely. So with that, you're talking about great women and women who people may not have heard of. So let's talk about Miss Annie Zachary Pike. And
Sure.
you just educate the listeners about who she is and her background.
Absolutely. Miss Annie Zachary Pike is from Marble, Arkansas, and she's in her 90s, and she's the last chapter in my book. And I actually initially wrote about her as part of a keynote address. And in that talk, which later became that chapter, I talked about how this woman was born on a farm, went to a segregated nursing school in St. Louis,
Hmm.
came back to Marble, Arkansas, and married this African American farmer who owned a significant amount of land. And throughout the years, particularly later after he died, she becomes the one who then owns and manages the land. And not only that, she's involved in these different organizations. She's the one who helps Black people get registered to vote in the 1960s. And not only does she get them registered to vote, she encourages them to vote Republican because in Arkansas and in other places, once upon a time, the Republican Party was the Progressive Party.
Hmm.
And she spent her entire life being involved in these different organizations to help people in the community. One of the things that she and her husband did is they took a portion of their land and they created a subdivision. So we're talking about people, Black and white, who had been sharecroppers on their property, who once mechanization increased in Arkansas, didn't really have any transferable skills and really didn't have any place else to live. And so what she was able to do with some assistance from the federal government is to create a space where they could build homes that these people could own. So all of that to say that I think this story is so remarkable because it completely turns the narrative of rural Black lives on its head. And as I tell people all the time, Black lives and Black stories are not just about the suffering. It's about the empowerment. It's about the entrepreneurship. It's about the institution building. And why is it that we have been conditioned to miss that part of the story? That's a critical part of the story. And also, this is a migration story in the sense that not everybody leaves the South. A lot of Black people never leave the South. They might visit relatives in the North, but they live in the South and they are a part of building and maintaining productive communities in these spaces.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that Miss Annie Zachary Pike is part of your book. Now, tell us about the book. Give us some
Oh,
information.
absolutely.
Yeah, we have to plug that. That's important because we want people to actually get the book, purchase it, and read it and
Mhm.
support. That's very important.
Well, I appreciate that. I published the book in 2021, and I'm actually currently working on another book
Hmm.
project. But I published that book because again, I wanted people to know these stories, and I called it rural activism because I wanted them to know that these Black communities, these Black women working in these spaces, they were never complacent and they were busy all the time. If they were involved in one organization, they were involved in 10, and it was probably more than that. And they were home demonstration agents, they were gene supervising teachers, they were just rural activists helping people with food security, helping people get registered to vote. And what's interesting about this is people assume that in African American history, a lot of this only happened in urban spaces. But that's not true. A lot of this happened in rural spaces as well. But again, people tend to trend toward thinking about what people are doing in urban spaces or even in southern urban spaces, because I tell people sometimes people leave rural Arkansas and move to Little Rock, which is a fairly large city.
Mm.
But these women are always laboring. They're always laboring for themselves, for their families, for their communities, for their children. They often try to leverage the limited political access they have. These are busy women. And so, why don't we know their story? And quite frankly, this was never meant to become a book. It was initially a conference paper on Black home demonstration agents in Arkansas that just took on a life of its own.
Wow, that's amazing. So you guys, you hear it. And later on in the conversation, we're going to have her tell you where you can purchase this book at. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, in that mention, you also talked about Gene's supervising industrial teachers. Kind of
Mhm.
elaborate on that so that the listeners can be educated.
So, Supervising Industrial Teachers, this was a program that was started by Anna T. Jeans in 1906, 1907. And she was a white Quaker woman from Pennsylvania. And she left $1 million endowment to educate African Americans in the rural South. And there are websites you can look at to determine what $1 million in 1907 is worth in 2024. It's a
Wow.
lot of money then, it's a lot of money now. Anyway, she supported the employment of Black teachers throughout the rural South. The fund put up part of the money, and then the local school systems put up the rest of it. And so you've got these Black women educators in rural communities all throughout the South who are going into spaces where they may not have schools or the schools are in very poor shape. And contrary to the fact that they were most commonly called Gene's teachers, the teaching was not just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was about things like sanitation.
Mm.
It was about things like how to keep mosquitoes out of your home. It was about things like learning how to wash your hands, basic things that we take for granted as sanitary measures in the 21st century. Once upon a time, people had to be taught how to do these things. It was about acquiring desks for
Wow.
school,
Hmm.
simple things, basic things, because often these things weren't available in Black communities. And it was also about them knowing how to tread lightly and comfortably. Well, no, not like comfortably, carefully in these spaces, because again, you're trying to uplift and educate a rural Black community at a time when landowners heavily depend upon their labor and they don't want you disrupting the racial status quo.
Wow. So we're talking about safety, how to live, and resources.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I love that. I love that. Now
Mhm.
let's move on to talking about the Arkansas Association of Colored Women.
Mhm.
Share that about what that is exactly,
Mhm.
and if those that are in Arkansas can get involved.
Well, the Arkansas Association of Colored Women, as I said, is the state organization under the National Association of Colored Women. And that particular organization, the national organization, still exists. It's
Hmm.
been around since 1896.
Wow.
In Arkansas, the Arkansas Association of Colored Women is this aggregation of all of these Black women's clubs from around the state, and they become a state organization in 1905.
Okay.
And the organization that I'm a member of, the Blytheville Social Art Club, is one of those organizations under the Arkansas Association of Colored Women. And it still exists today. The Arkansas Association of Colored Women still exists today. Many of these clubs under that umbrella still exist today. They just had their national meeting back in June,
Mhm.
I think it was. And so, really, if you wanted to get involved, it's just a matter of locating a member who can put you in touch with the right folks to get you in if that's what you want to do. But these organizations were designed to really do a lot of the same things that Gene's teachers and home demonstration agents did in Black communities. It's about improving Black communities, making sure people have access to health, uh, voter information, whatever the needs were, that's what they're invested in making sure these communities have.
So it's just like another, like a chamber of commerce, so to
Right.
speak, similar to that. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff.
I get you. Well, Maybe not exactly, but just think of all the organizations that have existed and still exist to help improve communities. That's what this organization did, and that's what it still does.
Okay. Now, is that similar to or branch off of the ACE fellowship program? Is that something totally different?
Well, the ACE, the American Council on Education Fellowship, yeah, that's a completely different thing. That was a
Okay.
program that I was in 21, 22,
Mhm.
and it's a well-regarded fellowship for people who want to go on to be university provost presidents and chancellors one day.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, tell us what is next for Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch. Now, we're not done yet, so don't think that's the closing. We have some other things, but just right now, tell us what is next for you.
You know, I, everything is next. Everything is possible. One of the things that I really love about being at this point in my life is that everything is possible, and I'm not afraid to
Hmm.
do those things. I'm not afraid to try them, to experiment with things because I know what I'm capable of. And I know that if I don't know, I can learn it really quickly. I have that level of confidence now, whereas I didn't always have that for a good part of my adult life. I didn't have that. And so now I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Communication. Who knows what's next?
Because you're a
Maybe
big deal.
provost, maybe chancellor, maybe president somewhere. We shall see.
Oh yeah, we have your back, guys. Okay, we have your back. Now, where are you with the book to make the Farm Bureau stronger and better for all people, African Americans, and the American Farm Bureau Federation of 1920 and 1966? Where are you with that?
I have gotten, as of now, as of today, 228 pages written, and I'm really just sort of dragging it out because I keep finding more and more information.
Hmm. I love
But
that. So we look
yeah,
forward to we look
yeah,
forward to whenever you finish that so we can be on deck and we can purchase that and we can support, or you get on stage and
mhm,
share it, whatever
mhm.
it looks like for you. We look forward to you completing that.
Okay, okay.
All right. So do you think in 2024, do you believe that the USDA is a friendly institution to Black people in today, and why or why not?
I think it's friendlier now today than it's ever been before. I
Mhm.
think it is having a serious discussion and attempting to address historical discrimination. So I see it moving forward.
Okay, good
Mhm,
stuff. Now, you've said before that you believe that everybody is a political being,
mhm.
right? Please share where that belief stems from.
If what that means for me is even if you say you're not political, you're being political.
Mhm.
And I think people get to define what that looks like for them. It could be having extensive conversations about politics all the time. It could be reading about it. It could be engaging it on television in some way. But I think in this particular moment, it's very difficult not to be political in some sense, even if you're not talking about it with people. It's churning away in your brain in some kind of way because really and truly, you just can't get away from it.
Absolutely. Now, what advice or message are you able to leave with our listeners this evening? And, doesn't necessarily have to be in particular about Black women leaders in Arkansas,
Mm,
but in general, what advice can you leave to those, especially your students that meet graduate students,
mm.
about just moving forward and being the best that they can be in life? What advice can you leave and put a stamp on?
Well, I'll tell you, one thing that I have told my students often is yes, it's okay to be scared. It's not okay to not move forward, to try
Hmm.
something, to do something. It is perfectly okay to do it scared as long as you do it. And life is not going to last as long as you think it will. Take advantage of the opportunities now. Do the things that you want to do now. And if you have naysayers, doubters, haters, all of that other sort of stuff, consider the source when people give you advice. Live your best life. You only get the one, and you are the master or the mistress of that life. Live it well.
I love that. So Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and being a special guest here tonight on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM, where there's always something good to talk about. And I tell you, you have definitely given us something great to talk about and leaving us with some inspiration and great knowledge and things of that sort. So, where can our listeners support you and find your books? And if any students are interested in attending Arkansas State University, what do they need to do? What is their next best step?
Well, if you're interested in attending Arkansas State University, they can just contact me directly. I've been around for a long time, so I know who to put you in contact with. And number two, the book, you can get it on Amazon.com or you can go to the University of Arkansas Press. Just put in my name, it'll pop up. And if you're ever in Jonesboro at Arkansas State or what have you, and you have the book, let me know. I'd be happy to sign it for you.
I love that. I love that. Now, is there anything else you would like to share before we move forward, before we depart for the night?
Just thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for reaching out to me and inviting me. I don't take any of this for granted. I'm grateful. I'm thankful, and God has been very good to me. And what I pray for every day fervently is that God uses me to be a blessing for others.
Absolutely. And we definitely receive that. And we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to grace us with your presence and your conversation because we know that you're important. And as you stated, you're not a gatekeeper. And that is very important so that you can share with other people so that we all can do better in our life and help others as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you again. So,
Thank
again,
you.
ladies and gentlemen, we have our special guest, family now of the station. We hope to have her back again so that we can hear more great things that she has done. So, Dr. Cherisse Jones-Branch, she is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Communication at Arkansas State University. And we again thank her so very much for gracing us with her presence. You'll be able to listen here on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. That's www.hindsightmediaradio.com. We are 365 days a year, 24/7. Tune in and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate y'all so much.
Thank you.